Hello, hello. Um, Good morning. Well, it is morning here in Colorado, and somehow I managed to, as I did last year, schedule this right after daylight savings. So hopefully people know what time it is today. My dog, for example, does not seem to know what time it is. um, well, if there is anyone here, feel free to ask questions in the chat. Usually that's all I do in these live streams is answer people's questions. And we tend to get pretty far with just that. Though if no one asks a question in the next 20 seconds or so, I will just start um, chatting a bit, maybe with some FAQs. I've actually been experimenting with using AI to analyze the transcripts for this like 30 hours of live stream videos that I've been doing to create a written FAQ. It's actually working pretty well. So be on the lookout for that. But as a result, I also know exactly the kinds of questions that people tend to ask in in these things. Hello, it's nice to see people here. Yeah, if you have any questions, please ask them. Um, Sometimes people get a little more specific in these live streams than maybe the questions they would put in comments, which sometimes I can answer and sometimes I can't. Hi, nobody has any questions? I'm trying to think if I've gotten any um recently comments on my videos or anything like that. Um I have been answering some questions lately that are sort of FAQs about letters of recommendation. Like who are the best people to write letters of recommendation. I do have a whole video about this. So I think that one thing that is worth reiterating is that I think that um people often think that the most important thing is like the credentials of the person who's writing. Um that like having a letter from someone who is very well regarded or famous or a full professor as opposed to someone new or an instructor or something like that is always better. That's not always the case. In fact, I would say that um, it's better to have a really good letter from someone who knows you well and can write useful things about you, who doesn't have the credentials of someone else, and having someone who might look really good on paper but doesn't have much to say about you. That's not as useful. Okay. Questions. um Most universities now ask for a writing sample to be uploaded, and I wanted to ask if someone is applying in social science but has a good writing sample that is related to technical science. um, would that be a good idea to upload? I think that typically when programs are asking for a writing sample, it's because they want to know how well you can write. Um, so whatever you think is the best example of your academic writing. It does not necessarily have to be like connected to the exact field that you're applying to, though I guess all things being equal, if you have two writing samples and one that seems closer to the field you're applying would probably be better. But I would say just provide whatever the best example of your writing is. What are some tips for a good statement of purpose? So I'll give you a short version for this, but I do have a whole video about statements of purpose. And I mean, I did make it 4 years ago, but my recollection is that I divided it into sort of like, here are 5 things that you should do. um, I was actually talking to a friend recently who's a law professor about law school admissions. And he was saying, because I was asking for his advice on behalf of someone that I know might be applying for law schools, and I was like, "What are law schools looking for in admissions these days?" It's 15 years since I went to law school, and I don't know anything about how my application was reviewed anyway. But anyway, one of the things he said was that, was that you can get really far with a statement of purpose that says why you want to go to law school. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah. So I think that actually PhD statements of purpose are kind of similar. I think you can get really far by doing two things. One is, why do you want to get a PhD? And two is, why do you want to get a PhD there? And if you can answer both of those questions, then I think you have a really good start on a statement of purpose. So that would probably be my main tip. Of course, there's more I could say too, but that's the quick answer. Um, so also related to statements of purpose, says they have a question regarding the future research agenda section, noting that it shouldn't be too specific or too broad. So curious what the fundamental essence of the committee or faculty trying to seek from that section. I may not completely understand your question, but I think like like why are you writing about future research? I mean, this seems like such a silly answer, but my answer is the essence they're looking for is, what is your future research agenda? I'm not really sure how else to answer that. Um, it's important to know what you want to do with your PhD, because that is part of what suggests whether that program is a good fit for you or not, and what faculty might be an appropriate advisor fit for you. Um, yeah, so that's basically the answer. Future research is important because that is what you might be doing during your PhD, and what you might be doing during your PhD is what suggests whether that program potentially is a good fit for you or not. Um, Next question. Um, Someone has a master's in organic chemistry and material science, and the question is how to coalesce those in a statement of purpose without appearing too broad, and intending to work in an interdisciplinary area. Well, first of all, I will say I have no idea what the how close together organic chemistry and material science are. If you told me they're basically the same thing, I would probably believe you. But my general answer with respect to like either you've done multiple things in the past, or the thing that you've done in the past is different from the thing that you're applying for a PhD program now in, is that you should be able to tell a story about how you got from there to here and how all of it connects. Now, sometimes people do different things. One of my faculty colleagues, his undergrad degree is in oh well, well actually okay, he has an undergrad degree in psychology, but also has um uh a double major in like dance or something like that. But you see students all the time who have, like some seemingly unrelated background. And that's fine. That's actually like not that unusual. There's probably still some story as to, um, how you got from there to here. Um, and if you're saying, you want to do interdisciplinary work, it's interdisciplinary, but it still has some cohesion, right? It's not like you're like, oh, I want to do, a joint chemistry dance PhD. I mean, that might be possible, but you need to tell a good story for it, right? So whatever the, interdisciplinary thing you want to do is, you should be able to describe what that is. All right. Someone had an interview with a prospective advisor, but she wasn't able to guarantee if she'll be able to take you in. Still plan to apply, but is it worth the try? Yes, unless they told you there is no chance, there is a chance. And also maybe there's another potential advisor in the department for you, or maybe things change. You know, People also ask me all the time, like, oh, I emailed a prospective advisor and they, weren't enthusiastic. or they didn't answer at all, or they told me they weren't sure whether they were taking students or not. Should I still apply? Yeah, I mean, it's also gonna be very unusual, I think. I mean, this does happen, but this does not happen very much. It would be very unusual for you to talk to a prospective advisor before you apply and them to tell you, if you apply, you will be admitted. That would be, frankly, that would be irresponsible, except for in very kind of unusual circumstances. Um, and so yeah, like I would say apply unless they tell you not to. Like a time when I would say maybe don't apply. And the only reason that I even say this at all is because I recognize that it costs money to apply to PhD programs, which is unfortunate, but that is how things are. I wish that was something that I personally could change. But that is how it is. Um, and so it does mean that you might want to be, somewhat selective in where you apply so as not to waste money. Um, if there is literally one person that you could see yourself working with in a program, um, like there's no one else that would make any sense to be your advisor, and you're going to apply to this program and you talk to them ahead of time and they tell you unequivocally there is no way that I can accept new students this cycle, because I'm out of funding or I'm retiring or something. Like they you often people will be very blunt about that, like especially the like, oh, I'm planning to retire in 3 years so I'm not going to take on new students. Like, believe them, they'll tell you that. If that were the case, there's literally no one else you can work with, and they tell you, I'm definitely not accepting students. Don't waste your money. But I would say that that's probably a pretty unusual. Um, all right. Difference about sorry. Question about the different dynamics between admissions committee and the actual faculty recruiting students. How can this varying dynamic affect the admission process? Um, how admissions work is going to vary drastically from department to department. So I can't really tell you much about. We don't really have an admissions committee in my department, for example. I mean, I guess like there's like people who run the process, right? So like, one of the reasons I started making these videos is because I am that person in our department. Like I run the graduate admissions process and the rest of the graduate committee sort of helps with that. And we do things like desk rejects. Um, but in a program, and big caveat here, this is not how things work in every discipline and not how things work in every department, but in a program in which admissions is tied very tightly to an advisor, then those individual advisors faculty can have a lot of power. Now it's not like sole power. And in my department, for example, every application is being reviewed by at least 3 faculty members. So that's the other thing about my department is it's very small. And so we don't have an admissions committee as such. Like basically the entire department is acting as the admissions committee. But I would say that even in places where there's an admissions committee who is reviewing all of the applications, that if there is a student that wants to work with a faculty member, probably the faculty member will end up seeing that application. That's certainly true in my department, and I would say probably true in most departments. Um, uh, and that if that faculty member really wants to work with that student and thinks they want to be admitted, like probably something, unless there are things that have to do with like how many students can be admitted, um, that's a good sign. Other than that, there's not really anything more specific I can tell you, unfortunately. So someone says, has a question about application fee waivers. Yeah. So the question here is basically, I'm trying to get application fee waivers, and it seems that a lot of schools don't have them. And what do you do? I wish I had a good answer for you on this. All I can say is that if you can't find information about application fee waivers, it's worth reaching out and asking just in case you've missed something. But some just don't have them. And so I can tell you that my department, for example, does not have fee waivers, and it's not because we don't want to waive fees. It's because it's not actually a waiver. At least this is how it works at my university. Waiver means someone pays for it, right? Like it doesn't actually get waived. It has to get paid from somewhere. And so some departments are fortunate to have budgets for this, and so they do their own internal fee waivers. And what this means is that the department is paying the money for those application fees to the university. My department has an exceptionally tight budget because we're quite small. And so unfortunately we just don't have a pool of money for that, and that's why we don't have fee waivers. That said, the university does have some fee waivers, and they have like a list of the fee waivers that they have, and those are like actual waivers sometimes. And so when someone asks me about a fee waiver, I will send them to that list. And then if they have any questions about it, there's people at the university level to ask. So that's all I can say really is if you're not sure, to ask. And then the question is sending cold emails to professors and none have responded. What do you do? Nothing. I mean, I would say sending a polite follow up after a couple of weeks is totally fine. I personally appreciate this. Um, you would not believe the number of emails that professors get. It is absolutely wild. And also depending on the language that you use, there's always some possibility that it gets shuffled into some kind of spam folder. I will tell you that Microsoft 365, like its spam filter in Outlook is out of control. um, so I would say wait a couple weeks, send a very polite follow up. You might still not hear. Some people either just don't see those emails or they get so many of them that they just don't respond. I try to respond to all of them that I get, but it would not surprise me if one or two slip through the cracks every year. It's very challenging. So I would say that not hearing back is not like some kind of sign not to apply to that program. As I often say, I feel like reaching out to prospective advisors ahead of time is a fact finding mission for you. It's not some sort of requirement, and it's not even normal in some fields. So also don't feel like you have to do that anyway. But I wouldn't take it as too much of a sign if you don't hear anything back. It's just unfortunate that you like don't have the sort of extra information that you were hoping to get. But uh, yeah, I would say just don't necessarily read too much into it. Um, what is the difference between a statement of purpose, a cover letter, a personal letter, and a motivation letter? Um, uh, Unless an application asks for all of those things, I would say they're the same thing. Like a statement of purpose and a motivations letter or like a personal statement are probably the same thing, just different words for the same thing, unless it asks for like both a statement of purpose and a personal statement, or like a research statement and a personal statement, or something like that. In which case, I would say a personal statement is probably more about like, who are you? Why do you want to get a PhD? And then a statement of purpose or a research statement is more like, what is the research you've done and want to do? Um, Cover letter, usually is shorter. It's probably kind of unusual for a place to ask for a cover letter, but not a statement of purpose. But if they ask for a cover letter with a statement of purpose, I would probably make it very short, and just say, here's why I'm applying to this program. If they ask for a cover letter and no other like kind of statement like that, then I would say make it longer and basically make it a statement of purpose, but write it like a letter, I guess. I've actually never heard of a PhD program application asking for a cover letter, so this is also why I'm not totally sure. Um, Next question: do you think all letters of recommendation should relate and speak to your proposed research area in the PhD? Um, No, not necessarily. I would say that the purpose of a letter of recommendation is to speak to your potential as a graduate student. Um, so someone may be able to speak to your potential as a graduate student without knowing anything about your research area. Um, I mean, I think it's good practice to send your letter writers your materials so that they know something about it, but they might not have anything to say about it, right? Like, so for example, um, let's say, I have a lot, I teach graduate level classes. I have a lot of like media studies and comm students in my classes. Some of them do, an excellent job, and I would be happy to write them a letter of recommendation if they were, say, you know, applying to a PhD program in media studies and want to study, I don't know, something I know absolutely nothing about. I would speak to how, like, what they did in my graduate class, and like, they wrote this amazing paper and it was on this topic, even if the topic wasn't what their research is about. And they were, a great participant. I think, they performed at a level that PhD students perform at, and so not necessarily, I think, would be my answer to that. Um, Sorry, let me scroll up and I lost my place. Um, Next person says, I want to apply for a PhD. I have a master's in the same subject, but it was coursework and not a thesis. Do you have to have research internships and a published research paper? No. Yeah, I think yeah. No, you do not have to have published research to get into a PhD program. Some people, I mean, it certainly it can make your application stronger, but you don't have to. No, for sure. I mean, again, it might depend on what field you're in and what programs for, like, how much of a leg up having published research would have. But okay, actually, I do this every single live stream, but let me give you my small rant on this. Um, let's say you have two different students, and one of them has been, like, working, with, like, maybe in a lab, like, with a professor, and, like, helping with research. This is a very common thing to happen when you're an undergraduate, for example, even, and a master's student. And so as a result, you are, third or fourth author on a paper that has been published because you helped with data collection and analysis. That is awesome. Excellent experience, like, gold star in your application. Let's say we have someone else who did, like, an independent research project. Maybe it started in a class and they were able to, like, they're turning it into, like, a real paper, or maybe it's a thesis, or it doesn't have to be, but, like something that they led themselves. Now, they led it themselves. They weren't just helping. So, like, it takes a long time, and then you have to get it all the way through so, like, they've done a whole project, but it's not published yet, because of course it's not, because, you're just, you're an undergrad or whatever. I don't think that the first person is, like, inherently in a better, have a stronger application than the second person, just because a paper they're on happens to be published. So that's my slight rant on that. Now, a slightly related question here might be, like, just about the research experience in general. Maybe you don't actually have, like, formal research experience, either because you didn't do, a thesis where someone was, like, advising you into doing your own project, or maybe, you are at a university where, like, it's not common for undergraduates to help in research labs. Maybe you are in a humanities discipline and you didn't do a thesis, and so, like, there wouldn't have really been any other way for you to get research experience. I think that can still be fine. I've had students in my lab who didn't have formal research experience before they were admitted. And, this means two things. So, one, you probably have had some kind of experience in your coursework that looked like what what research looks like in your field. Maybe it was a like big group project, some kind of, like, group project in, a class. Maybe it was a paper that you wrote for a class that was like, there's something you've done that probably looks like research in your field. Um, and then the other thing is, if you don't have formal research experience, you need to be able to explain very well in your statement of purpose why you want to do research. Because I would say, this is a little bit my sort of personal take on this, when I'm reading applications. So I don't know that everyone would feel the same as me. But for me, if I see an applicant who has no research experience at all, I'm less concerned about, like, their lack of experience. Like, oh no, they're not going to know what to do. I'm more concerned with, um, how do they know this is what they want to do forever? Like, if you've never done research before, do you understand enough about what it is to know that you want to get a PhD? And you very well may totally know, but that's something then that you should talk about. All right, next question. Why are there so many uncertainties with professors in terms of PhD positions? Does the wording of the email matter? And how do you frame the problem of common interest? Well, I can answer that first part. Why are there so many uncertainties? Um, Unfortunately, well, okay, so there's different kinds of uncertainties here, right? So, like, one uncertainty might be, like, would you be admitted into this program? And that's not something that an individual advisor can tell you. Another uncertainty might be, will they take more new students at all? And then another one is, of course, would they take you? And so the first and the third, like, they're just not going to be able to tell you that, right? Like, for lots of reasons. A, they haven't seen your application, and you should not be sending them entire applications in an email. B, there are other people involved in decisions about who is admitted, and three, they don't know who else is going to apply. Maybe they can take one student, and so it might be a lucky year where, like, you're the top of the batch for those potential students in terms of fit, or there might be someone else who's going to be the top of the batch for students in terms of fit for that professor. But of course, another uncertainty is they might not even know if they're going to be able to take new students at all. There are a lot of reasons for this. One, maybe they have pending grants. Like, they have submitted grant proposals. They're hoping they're going to get more money so that they can support more students, but they don't know yet. Unfortunately, the timing of this can be really crazy. And this is one of the reasons why I suggest that it's not very useful for people to reach out to professors to ask about this in, like, June, because it's very often they might not know about things like funding yet. Another reason might be, maybe they have current students that they're not sure, like, maybe it's unclear when they're going to graduate, or whether they're going to stay in their lab, or like whether a master's student is going to convert into a PhD, or something like that, where they might not know how much capacity they're going to have next year. There also might be issues with funding and capacity at the department level. So, for example, when we do PhD admissions, we will, like, look at how many teaching assistant lines we have across the department, and, like, how we could dole those out among faculty, and who has grants to cover the other lines, and how many people can we admit based on that. And sometimes you just have to be able to, and so, like, for example, then if there's a faculty member who there's no one in the pool who looks like they're going to work for that person, and so they're like, I'm definitely not going to be admitting any students this year, maybe that frees up a teaching assistant line so that someone over here, like, now there's an extra student that they can admit, right? There's just all of these things that means they definitely can't tell you this, with the exception of, like, sometimes in Europe, especially, they're like, when you're applying to a program, it's like for, like, an advertised specific position. That's not very common in the US. Uh, Other part of it, does the wording of the email matter? I mean, it matters in the sense that it should be, like, appropriate and ask the things that need to ask, and also, uh, reflect that there's a reason that you're reaching out to this person. I mean, I every year I get emails from prospective students who say that they want to do, like, deep learning or something, and I'm like, why? Why are you writing to me? And maybe they say, like, here's 2 paragraphs about my, like, AI development experience, and I really want to do deep learning for my PhD, but I want to work with you because I care about ethics. And, like, that at least is enough of a, like, hook that I'm like, okay, I don't really think I'd be a good advisor for you if this is what you want to do, but, like, here's all the information. Like, maybe I'm wrong. Like, maybe they know better. Maybe they know better. But the other thing is that the wording of the email that you send to them shouldn't matter in terms of your application. Well, I mean, probably not, unless you do something really weird. Like, I'd say be careful in your interactions with prospective advisors you're reaching out to ahead of time, that you don't do anything weird. Like, you don't do anything that's, I don't know, like extremely demanding, or, like, I mean, I've gotten some emails that are borderline rude. So like, be careful about that kind of thing. But like a normal email, like, here's who I am. I'm potentially interested in your PhD program. I'm curious about what research you're working on now and whether you're taking students. Totally fine. Don't stress about it. Um, I will say, I have this like template email. It's sort of like a Mad Libsy kind of thing. It's I think it's actually a Twitter thread, but I think I also have it in the text of my video about reaching out to prospective advisors. Something like that works. I might suggest not using that exact template, just because a lot of people have seen it, and it starts to look a little weird if you're getting emails from prospective students that are literally exactly the same. When it happens to me, I know what it is because I wrote the email, and I have gotten that exact email back to myself multiple times this year. It doesn't bother me. I think it's a little funny. It doesn't bother me at all. But I suspect that if other faculty are getting that exact email, I suspect they're going to think it's written by AI. So just be aware. I mean, and I don't. Most people, I suspect, would not care about that at all. If I got an email and I thought ChatGPT wrote it, I would not care at all. But you never know. So maybe just don't use like an exact form email that you that you find on the internet. All right, next question. Seen some PhD openings where they mentioned it's not required to connect with the supervisor. Is this still a good idea? So it's never required unless they specifically tell you it's required, which I don't tend to see that happening. It's totally up to you. As I often say, it is a fact-finding mission to you. So the question is, what do you need to know? Right? Um, and if there's something that you need to know, then I think it can be useful. Um, especially if it's a field where it's common for people to do that, you should probably ask around for your specific field, like, professors or whatever. Like, do people tend to do this? If it is a field where they tend to do it, then I think it probably doesn't hurt to reach out as long as you're actually asking them something. The purpose of reaching out to a prospective advisor isn't to like send them your application ahead of time. It's because you have some question for them to answer. Can you share insight into the review committee? For example, a college mentioned applications go through 3 levels of reviews to reach applicant decisions. I can't really because I don't know how it works everywhere. So earlier in this live stream, I talked about how it works in my department, but my department is very small, so we don't really have an admissions committee. The whole faculty just does it. So I really, so I don't, I suspect in larger places they have an admissions committee that does the same kind of thing, like having multiple people look at applications and probably like push those applications as well to the faculty that person wants to work with. That's my guess, but I don't know for sure. All universities I see offer a funding package. Uh, of 30K per year for a PhD. Is that enough, especially for areas like New York? Probably not. PhD stipends are peanuts. They suck. That is how it is. It's going to be better and worse, and it's going to be better or worse in some places depending on the cost of living. So $30,000, for example, would be great if you were at University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. Now, I'm making a guess. I was just thinking of like the most like sort of rural Midwest kind of place I could think of, like Bloomington, Indiana, State College, Pennsylvania. I don't actually know anything about the cost of living in these places. I'm just guessing. But $30,000 would look very different in New York City. Yeah, I mean, in general, you're gonna be making peanuts while you're getting a PhD. Like, that's just how it is. And should you be fortunate enough to be admitted into multiple PhD programs, then that is a thing that I would recommend taking into account. How much that matters to you, what the cost of living is, what the housing situation is, and all of these kinds of things. Whether you're willing to take out a little bit of loans if you have to do that to survive. All kinds of questions. And then, if you are limiting the number of programs that you are applying to because of the cost of applying, then you might take this into account as well. Like if you know there's absolutely no way you would ever go to a university in New York City because you know the cost of living is so high, then maybe don't apply there. Um, could you ooh, do do do. Sorry, to catch it, finding my place. Um, could you share what is a good email to send to a potential PhD advisor? What are they expecting? So I think I just talked around this a little bit. Um, so again, my question to you would be, what do you need to know? Like what, or rather, why are you emailing them, right? Um, uh, and usually the answer to this is you want to know if they're considering taking on new students so that if they tell you absolutely not, there's no way, you can sort of cross them off your list. And you also might want to know, like, what is the current research they're doing, or do they have any sort of recruiting priorities? Um, so I think those are the most common things. So those are the kinds of things, that you would probably ask about. Um, Next question. In CS, I want to know if admission committees prioritize a high quantitative score, or is it better to have an overall score? What do you think matters more? I think that GREs. Oh, wait, hold on. Let me be careful about how I say this. Uh, okay. I personally do not put much stock in GRE scores. This is just based on my personal experience and knowing many, many students' GRE scores and how those students have done in their PhDs and these kinds of things. And also my own GRE scores, which, were fine. Um, and this is one reason why so many programs don't require GRE scores anymore. Well, there's multiple reasons programs don't require GRE scores anymore. One is that they might not mean as much as we think they do. Two, there are lots of reasons why people do badly on standardized tests that have nothing to do with their potential as a PhD student. And three, GRE costs money. It costs money. It costs money to take it. It costs money to send the scores to universities. And it also costs like time and resources to study for the GRE. And some people who have a lot of time and resources can do better on the GRE just because they have a lot of time and resources to study and to hire tutors and these kinds of things. So these are all reasons why programs don't necessarily require them anymore. That said, some do. And I tend to find that when programs seem to care a lot about GRE scores, it tends to be quantitative scores or maybe the writing score, um, because they want to know if you can write. And I wonder actually if um, the fact that I imagine, and this is no judgment, just a fact of life, that a lot of students are using AI to help write application materials means that some places will care more about qualitative GRE scores or like writing GRE scores because they think that it'll be, an indicator of the students writing that they can't get necessarily from their application materials. Yeah, so I don't know so I don't sorry, to answer your question, like, would a CS program care more about one or the other? I don't actually know. I mean, my intuition would be that if they require it, like a like hard a sort of like traditional CS program, probably more quantitative, but I don't actually know. But in any case, it's not like you should just do your best. It's so it's not like you're gonna, throw your quant score to make it worse so that your score looks more balanced. I would not recommend doing that. um, are PhD applications only forwarded the professors mentioned in the statement of purpose, or can other professors go through it? It completely depends on how it works at any given program. Um, I yeah, I have no idea for any particular programs that you might be applying to. I mean, I would say that um and again, individual professors don't like I would say that probably if you mention a specific professor in your statement of purpose, they will see that application or have the opportunity to see that application. I'm only thinking about, I mean, that certainly would be true. I mean, that is 100% true in my department because again, we're quite small. If this is a place that gets 1,000 applications, though, it is entirely possible that there's some committee going through and filtering so anyway, I have no idea how places that get 1,000 applications go through them. I That scares me. um, all right, next question. Applying for a PhD in chemical engineering. Can you talk more about the introduction and research part of the statement of purpose? Um, uh, I mean, introduction. I mean, there's so many different ways that you could start a statement of purpose. I would say that most commonly it's sort of about you. And then the research portion tends to be some stuff you've already done that then leads into the stuff that you want to do. And usually there's some connection between those. Again, my sort of, and again, I have a whole video on statements of purpose. And the advice that I give is like to not be too like to resist being too specific. Now with the caveat that some places, and again, I'm thinking of PhD programs in Europe, they want like an actual research proposal. A general statement of purpose typically doesn't isn't looking for I am going to do a dissertation on this exact topic and it will be these 3 studies. Um, and the reason for this is that A, you're probably wrong. But B, it's you want to make sure that y- there y- that faculty can see a fit with you, and maybe it's the thing that you want to do is exactly what a faculty member is doing, in which case you can be a little more specific. But you don't want to like you don't want it to seem like you are completely rigid, like you're so set on what you're going to do that you're not going to be open to anything else. And so I tend to suggest this sort of like funnel approach where you talk about like um, the overall area that you're interested in, and then sort of funnel that down to something slightly more specific. And then, for example, here are some things. I mean, not specific studies necessarily, but like, sort of topic areas. And sometimes this means, mentioning stuff you've done before or things that, some faculty in that department have done before and that sort of thing. Be careful though to not assume that a faculty member is still doing the same thing they did 10 years ago. I might not recommend like mentioning a very specific project that a faculty member published 10 years ago, and then saying I want to do exactly that, because that person might be like, oh well, too bad I don't do that anymore. My PhD advisor, for example, sort of like completely changed, I mean not completely, but like it like pretty drastically though changed focus like partway through her professorship. And so as a result, students wanting to do X who wanted to work with her would be a sort of like auto out. And and when I say auto out, I don't mean like, oh no, this means that student isn't good enough. It means that's not a good advisor for them. When we talk about advisor fit and that kind of thing, this isn't like a filtering mechanism so that we get, the best students who can do exactly what we want them to do. It's because it would not be a good place for you to go if you can't do the thing that you want to do. Um, and so that's the other thing that I would really recommend is that you are honest about, don't rewrite your statement of purpose for every place you apply to make it seem like you want to do something completely different just to like fit the faculty who are there. Like I mean, I can't stop you from doing that, but you shouldn't do that. Because you don't want to end up getting a PhD that you don't want. Like if you want to get a PhD, it's because you care about something, right? Like there's something that you care about and want to do. And if that's not the thing you get to do, like it might not be a very pleasant PhD for you. So I would really encourage you to be honest. Sorry, that was not all an answer to that question. I just went off on a bit of a tangent there. All right, next question. Um, recent grad applying to a social science PhD program. Do you have tips for finding good? Ooh, I think you have the I think you have the wrong word here. You said predatory research programs. I don't know what that means. I'm just going to ignore that word and just say you mean good research programs or professors seeking RAs. Um, yeah, so I've also got a video on like finding PhD programs. And there's a bunch of different ways you can do this, you know. Um, One is if you're in a sort of narrow field, you can like find the programs in that field. Like maybe there aren't a ton of them and just look at all of them. Sometimes the more common thing is to start with faculty. So you find the people in your field who are doing the work that you want to do, which means, Google Scholar, conference proceedings, these sorts of things, and then see where they are, and then look at those programs. I would say that that's the sort of most common. Um, uh, Professors seeking RAs is a different kind of thing. So, um, okay, so more caveats. Again, in some places, particularly in Europe, um, professors are basically hiring PhD students. Like, I am looking for a student for this particular project, this particular funding line. That's a whole thing. I don't actually know the answer for how to find those things. Sometimes I see them posted on mailing lists, personally. But so I can't answer that question. But if that's what you mean, um, ask around in your field would be my advice. Um, if we're thinking about PhD programs in the US, or places that are more sort of similar to what I know, that's not really how it works. So I also have a video somewhere on funding for a PhD and sort of common ways that PhD funding works. So I'm going to tell you how it works in my department, and I happen to know that this is similar in a lot of other places. Um, when students are admitted, they are promised funding, but not a particular type of funding. So you might be a teaching assistant for 2 years and then an RA for 2 years, or you might maybe the professor you're working with like has a project that needs to be done right away, so we end up with an RA the first year. Maybe you end up. I've funded students as RAs who are not my advisees, because I had more work that needed to be done than I had students. So it's not. Yeah. So I would unless you're thinking about programs where they are specifically hiring PhD students for a particular thing. Um, I would not worry about that. Um, you should look at whether they're offering funding, of course, the whole program offering funding. Next question. Does having teaching experience increase someone's chance of getting into a PhD program? Or a TA, for example. Excellent question. I would say this varies. I would say it can be a nice little bonus. I don't know if it has like if it makes a huge difference. It probably makes more of a difference in fields where um you're going to be doing a ton of teaching. um but yeah, this is going to vary. I would say that when I'm looking at an application, I'm like, oh, that's nice, like they'll already know a little something about teaching when we throw them into a teaching assistantship without a lot of training, which is unfortunately what happens. So it could help a bit, and I think it'll depend on how much it helps. um do you think that a uh ooh I w- do you think that a BSc direct has a huge chance of getting selected for a PhD than an MSc? Does this mean a bachelor's degree over a master's degree? A huge chance of getting okay, I see what you're asking. Okay, sorry. I needed a second to parse that. You are asking basically, could someone without a master's degree get into a PhD program, potentially over someone with a master's degree? Yes, sure. So another thing that I, have said here quite often is that a a master's degree can mean a better PhD application, but I don't think that it is by virtue of having a master's degree. The reason that students with master's degrees often have better applications is because they have had 2 more years to do stuff. they've taken graduate level classes, and so they might have like letters of recommendation from people who taught graduate level classes and can speak to them as a graduate student. It also means that they probably have more research experience, or a lot of times have more research experience than people coming straight out of undergrad. So these things like just often tend to mean that they have stronger applications. That said, sometimes people coming straight out of undergrad also have those things. Sometimes they have a ton of research experience as an undergrad. Sometimes they have like the most amazing letters of recommendation from, faculty who are like, they took my undergrad class, but I would have thought they were a PhD student based on the work they did in this class. So yeah. And with the caveat that some PhD programs require you to have a master's degree. I think that's more common in the humanities. So keep that in mind as well. Next question. Someone says they're not very confident about asking for a letter of rec. How should they do it? I think so. I'm trying to remember. I feel like I have a video about letters of rec, and I feel like in it I talked about how to ask someone, and I feel like I'm not remember. I feel like I said something really smart in that video that I don't remember. uh, um, but one thing that comes to mind is that there is a way. So, okay, first of all, the first thing to know is we know, like, this is expected, right? You're not putting us out. Like, we get asked to write letters of recommendation all the time. It is part of our job. This isn't like, you're not asking someone for a kidney. Like, it will not be an unusual or burdensome request. So just know that. You will not be the only one to ask them this year. Particularly if you said you're working closely with them. If you're working closely with them, they probably expect you to ask them for a letter of recommendation. Like, they're just waiting. They're like, someday this person's going to ask me for a letter of recommendation. So I would not worry about that. There's also a way, and like, your mileage may vary, but I think there's a way to ask for a letter of recommendation that's also like potentially slightly flattering. Um, so especially if it's someone that you don't know as well. Like, um, uh, I have decided to apply for a PhD program in this field. I took this class of yours last year, and I loved this class so much. And what I learned there is, one of the things that like encouraged me to pursue this field. Like learning things in your class made me want to go to grad school. So I was hoping you could write me a letter of rec. So like, if it's true, if that kind of thing is true, you can say it. The other thing that I will add, just because I have noticed that students seem to have some anxiety about this, and so I've had to sort of like clarify this. Once someone writes you a letter of recommendation, it is very little work to send it to more places. So don't worry about how many places you're asking them to send it to. So like once you write a letter, I mean, they might not even personalize it to the school at all. I do. Like, I will change a couple of sentences to personalize it to that program. But you don't even have to do that. And when I see a letter of rec that's clearly like, it's gonna, like, they sent the same one, I don't care. That's like totally normal. So it takes 5 seconds. Okay, maybe more than that. They might make you do a login or whatever. But like, it's not much work to send it to more places. So once they've agreed to write a letter, don't worry about like the number of places you're asking them to send it to. Let's see. Let me find my place again. How do you recognize that applicants have great passion in their research given that they have rich research experiences? I'm sorry. I don't think I understand your question. Feel free to rewrite it if I'm not answering it. Um, but I guess how do you show that you have passion for research? I mean, I don't really know how to tell you how to do that, but that would be a good thing to do in a statement of purpose. Like, again, a big part of a statement of purpose is, why do you want to get a PhD? And that probably is because you care a lot about something and you want to do research about that thing. So that's a good thing to say. On which part do you usually focus on when you read statements of purpose with extensive research experience? I read an entire statement of purpose. They're not that long. Also, make sure they're not that long. I would also say, like, your statement of purpose isn't a resume. So don't just like list off all the things that you've done. Like, there should be some narrative. Um, uh, I'm not sure how to answer that. I mean, I guess, typically, again, things that I personally look for in a statement of purpose is like, can I tell why they want to get a PhD? Um, can I tell that they like know they want to do research, like, and because of their experience or how they can write about wanting to do research, and does it make sense for them to be here, and to work with me, sort of based on the kinds of stuff that they want to do. Um, do all universities provide TA and RA-ships for thesis students for masters? No. So I think what you're asking here is, do all programs fund master students? And the answer to that is definitely no. Um, I think it's actually pretty unusual for programs to guarantee funding for master's students. Now, a lot of master's students get funding. Occasionally, in my department, for example, we don't have enough PhD students who need funding in any given semester to fill all of our teaching assistant lines, and so we've had master's students have TA lines before. But yeah, so but I also realize there's a different way to read your question. You might be asking, do universities provide TA-RA-ships for PhD students who already have master's degrees? And I I don't think there's any reason it would matter whether you have a master's degree or not. But the question is that I think most PhD programs provide funding. And that is a question that you should find out program by program. Like, you should know before you apply if you're going to have funding. Um, how much deviation in research experience and interest should you consider when choosing a faculty member to email? Um, I, I think that is entirely up to you. Could you see yourself working with this person based on what you want to do? And again, uh, emailing someone ahead of time, you're not applying. You're emailing them because you need to know something. So maybe what you need to know is, what is their current research, or what are the things they're doing right now or wanting to do in the future, so that you can decide about that deviation. Um, if your master's is not completed, but will be before the begin, do you include it in your do you include it and your tentative thesis title in your CV? Yes. Well, okay, in your CV, so a CV, and I do have a video about CVs too. A CV has education, and it has what you're doing right now, and it usually has a expected graduation date. So it'd be like, your education at the top, like, says bachelor's degree in this, deferred this date, master's degree in this, expected this date. And it's not unusual to have a thesis title or something underneath that. So I think that's fine. And then, of course, you should also be writing about your thesis in your statement of purpose. If you have a thesis in your master's but no other research experience, will it work for your PhD application in computer science? Yes. As I said, I don't think that it actually should be a requirement to even have, like, what could be considered formal research experience in order to be accepted into a PhD program, as long as you can um, talk about how you want to do research and get a PhD and all that, and maybe experiences that you've had, for example, in classwork, that are like research in your field. But if you have a thesis, like, that sounds to me like, I mean, a thesis is research. Like, a thesis probably is research experience. So I think you're probably fine. It sounds to me like you do have the research experience. Someone has given me some oh, sorry. Okay, two different things. Okay, someone gave me a bunch of stats and then asks if they're eligible for a PhD in a particular field. I can't. There's absolutely no way I can answer that for you. In part because I'm not in that field, and also I can't ever answer these kinds of questions, unfortunately. I have, okay, sorry. Some PhD programs require an additional essay for a research proposal. What do committee members want to know with this talk? I'm not as familiar with this. Again, I tend to see PhD programs outside of the US, this to be more common. So I've never seen one of these before. So I would ask some people in your field. There's also a couple of other creators on YouTube who are outside of the US context and give advice about PhD applications who might be helpful. How do PhD admissions committee determine who gets a full fellowship? I'm applying for a PhD in higher education. So so it sounds to me like you are asking about a PhD program where not everyone is guaranteed funding. I do not have, I unfortunately don't know a lot about that in my field. Funded PhDs are the norm. And so all students who are admitted are funded. So I don't actually know how those decisions are made. If that's a decision that's made like for the applicants, like some are funded and some are not. Unfortunately, I don't know anything about how that works. Someone has done a master's in the UK and wants to do a PhD in the USA. Will that be a concern? No, that will not. It doesn't matter at all. International students with degrees from all over are accepted all the time. And it doesn't, so yes, professors across the world do totally know each other. But it also doesn't really matter. So I think maybe what you're asking is like, oh my gosh, is it going to matter that the people in my program don't know the person who's writing my letter of recommendation? It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. If they really want to know, they can Google them. But people are not admitted to PhD programs based on like someone knowing the people who wrote their letters of recommendation. So someone else has asked for whether they could be considered for a PhD program based on particular statistics. And again, I just can't answer that. It appears professors are not willing to accept students with study gaps, although academically bright and many years of professional experience. Why would these categories of students not be accepted? Not true. Maybe it's true for some people. That seems very silly for me, though. That makes absolutely no sense to me. And yeah, maybe it's a weird disciplinary thing. But I would guess that about a third of our PhD programs have like worked for a while before getting their PhD. I think students who worked for a while before a PhD are awesome. They tend to be a little bit older, sometimes, have sort of quite ingrained like professional norms. They have interesting kinds of life experience. So yeah, I think a lot of people would actually consider that a positive. So I think my answer to that is, fortunately, I don't think that's actually the case. How do you get academic references from 20 years ago if you're coming in as a non-traditional student? Oof, yeah, that's rough. So first of all, as I just said, definitely don't count yourself out for having a big gap. But this is a situation where maybe you don't have academic references, and that can be fine. You just need to think about who can speak to your potential as a PhD student. Now, you can try, of course, if there's someone that you remember well enough and you think might remember you, like totally try, knowing that you might strike out on this. If it really is 20 years, maybe everyone could be retired by now. So just do the best that you can. Think about other types of people who can speak to your potential as a graduate student. I think I just answered this question accidentally. Someone has industry experience after your master's. Could it be a plus point towards your PhD? Yeah, it totally can. Yep. So I think that can, and also if you have depending on what kind of job it is, there might be some kind of supervisor where it would make sense for them to write you a letter of recommendation. BS in mechanical engineering, MS and CS, publication record, research experience. How do you evaluate this application? I can't, sorry. I really can't tell anyone, whether you might get into a PhD program based on anything like this. Um, will 15 years of teaching experience at the college level increase your admission chances for a PhD? I answered the question earlier about whether teaching experience can help, and I think that it can. I think that it depends on the field, and how teaching heavy the field and the program is also might make a difference there. At 32, is it too late to return to academia? 100% no. Totally not at all. And it seems like you have a lot of good stuff going for you here. All right, we are to the last question, and it's only 5 after the hour. So please ask more questions if you have them. Next question. Um, bachelor's GPA, master's GPA, negative. So you're asking basically whether, okay, I see. So you're saying that your GPA went down a little bit if you're a master's program, but that's in part because you were an RA and so very busy. A, those GPAs aren't terrible. But B, a GPA is one tiny part of not tiny, but like it's one part of an application. So, it could be that your RA experience is actually way more important than what your GPA is. So I would never, count yourself out because of any particular like numbers anywhere in your application. Should you write about non-academic hobbies in your personal letter? So is this a case where there's a separate, like there's a statement of purpose and a personal statement separately? If that's the case, and then personal statements really are sort of more personal. And it's something that's like kind of related. I've never, for whatever reason in my field, this distinction is not common. Like a separate personal statement. And so I don't totally know. I confess I don't totally know what they look like. I've never seen one before. We don't do this. And I've never like mentored anyone who has done this. So I just don't know what they look like. But my intuition is like, I just don't know. So the fact that I don't know makes me think it's probably fine either way, leaning towards including it if it is kind of related in some way to academics or leadership skill, like something that would matter, as opposed to just like, I enjoy knitting in my free time is probably less important to include. US or UK, which is better for a PhD in CS? I don't know. It depends. I don't think there's an answer to that. There's probably certain programs that are better than others. But being CS adjacent, there are certainly some good CS programs in the UK as well. So yeah, I don't think there's any categorical like better from this country or this country. Doing a master's in CS. First semester was online. Next year on campus. Will the hybrid thing affect your application? I don't see why it would. I don't even see why they would. I don't see why they would know unless you mention it. And B, and even if they did know, I don't see why that would matter at all. The only reason that I could think that would even come into play would be like if you had trouble with letters of recommendation because of like faculty who didn't know you because they taught you over Zoom. But that's just a different kind of issue. Is it necessary to provide a very narrow research interest or broader research interest? So this is something that I talk a little bit about, about in a little bit more detail in my statement of purpose video with, I think, maybe an example. And apologies, this is a little bit redundant to something I said earlier if you were here. I think that the best strategy, I personally, and again, you might get different advice from different people. My feeling on this is that it's a good idea to start broad and then go narrower, but never too narrow. So like, I'm applying for a PhD in computer science. And my interest broadly is on artificial intelligence and fairness. For example, I'm very interested in the bias in social media recommendation algorithms. Um, I could see myself um, working with Dr. Smith, um, who has done work on um, uh, AI bias, or I could see myself working with Dr. Johnson, who has done work on um, racism in online communities, or something like that. So, like broad to narrow to examples tends to be my sort of default recommendation. And part of the reason for that is that you don't want to make it seem like you're so rigid that you're only willing to do one thing, because that makes it less likely that faculty could sort of see how you could work with them, unless like you already know that there's a person who is doing exactly what you want to do, and that is the thing that you want to do, which I think is pretty unusual. Also, people very often are extremely wrong about what they are going to do. I mean, I would say that like greater than 50% of the time, what people end up doing for their PhD bears no resemblance to, okay, not no resemblance, um, but like is not the thing they said in their statement of purpose. Like it's probably in the ballpark unless they switch advisors. Um, but it's usually not exactly the thing. What's the best way to write cold emails to profs and the timeline? So, timeline, I tend to recommend no more than 3 months before the deadline, um, and no closer than like 2 weeks before the deadline. Um, uh, so, like for me, I tend to like September, if the deadline is say December 1st, which is very common. That's what our deadline is, for example. I tend to say like September, October is the best time to be writing. Um, but like I anticipate I'll get a bunch of emails in the next few weeks, and that's fine. Um, though getting an email after you've applied is not particularly useful, because like anything I tell you then is not going to do it's not going to do you any good, right? Um, I have a whole video on writing these kinds of emails, and I'll say one more time that uh this is a fact-finding mission to you. So the answer to like what kind of email you should write is like, what is it that you need to know? Oh, and let me give another thing. So just because I've seen this more commonly this year. And I haven't, and I have not had anyone be like rude or demanding at all in this sense, aside from like initial sort of ask. But I really recommend against like demanding a meeting. Um uh Sometimes some faculty will want to talk to people before they apply. I think that's more common with new faculty who are really trying to recruit and also might not be getting a ton of applications. But like if I met with every single person who emailed me, like that's all I'd be doing. I mean, it would take so much time. Um, and it feels unfair to me to pick some people to meet with. So I will answer every question that you ask me over email. Um, but I'm probably not gonna have a meeting with people before they apply. We have meetings with people after they apply. Like once we have a short list, then we do these sort of like interviewee kinds of things. But I'm always happy to answer questions over email. So, and I think a few people would be, if they're going to respond to these emails at all, which sometimes they don't. Yeah. Is it compulsory to provide a professor's name in the statement of purpose? Can you provide more than one prof? It is. It's probably not compulsory, but it is if you're in a field where advisor fit is very important, like that you're going to probably be admitted to work with an advisor, that like you're going to be doing research with an advisor, I would say that it's a very good idea. Um, it also is helpful for um, we actually and again, I run our PhD admissions, and so after a few years, this was my call, like, "Oh my god, please, we have to change this in the application." We now have a specific application field that says, "List 3 faculty that you would be interested in working with," and the reason we do that is because people weren't mentioning faculty, and it made it hard to read between the lines and figure out who it might be. And that's what I was doing. I was reading every statement of purpose that came in and assigning them to people to review. And if they didn't mention people, I was kind of having to read between the lines and guess who they might want to work with. Um, so I would say that it's in some fields that is not compulsory, but an extremely common thing to do. But again, this might be the kind of thing where you want to ask about the norms in your field. Um, doo, doo, doo. When a professor asks to introduce yourself in an interview, how should you say that in an organized manner? You tend to over-explain. Um, Well, if you're starting an interview, like I would say if you're starting an interview and this is the first question they ask you, like, can you tell me a little bit about yourself? And this is such a common question that, like, go ahead and have an answer prepared for this. Like, I would say, like, maybe make it on the shorter side, knowing that they'll ask you follow-up questions, and that'll keep you from, like, rambling too much, right? Like, um oh, well, I'm currently a master's student in this program. Um, and lately I've been working on this kind of research, which I'm really excited about, which is why I'm applying for PhD programs. Or you could even like go even shorter and be like, oh, I'm originally from this place, but I've been pursuing a master's in this field. And my interest in research has just really like made me very excited about applying for PhD programs right now. A professor replies that I want to work with you, and then you won't hear back from them. It's very confusing. Um, did s- did you ask them a follow-up question? So it sounds like you're saying you had an exchange with the professor. They said, um, "Oh, I would be interested in working with you." And I'm guessing they probably said, like, "I'd be interested in working with you. Please apply to our program." And then so did you ask them a follow-up question that they have not responded to? In which case I would say, even if that's the case, don't sweat it. Um, but I like probably if they said I would like, I might be interested in working with you, what you should read between the lines there is please apply to the program. Um, if the statement of purpose asked by the university is too short, what should be included and what not? Um, same stuff, just shorter. Why do you want to get a PhD? What are you interested in? Why that place? But just shorter. Explain more about the important part of the statement of purpose. The admissions committees read word for word. They go through specific sections. It depends on what they're reading it for. Uh, yeah. So basically, what I just said are sort of the typical parts of a statement of purpose. Um, so it is possible, I suppose, that if someone is reading through it just for so okay, there is some possibility that there's some filtering at the beginning that is for fit. And when I say filtering and fit at the beginning, I mean very broadly. I mean, like, did you just apply to a psychology PhD program saying that you want to do chemical engineering, like that kind of filtering? Or in our case, for example, I'm in an information science program, and there are a lot of information science programs that are information and library science. It's kind of the same field, but like not totally. We're a very sort of computer sciencey information science department, and no one in our entire department does library science. Like, there's no faculty who do that. We don't have a library science master's program. No one does that kind of research. And every year we get a couple of applications from people who say, I want to do library science, and they don't name any of our faculty. Those tend to get desk rejected just because there's not any point in reviewing them. Like, they don't need to come here. They need to go to a library science program. So um yeah, so like that kind of filtering might happen. So I would suggest like making sure that the fit thing actually makes sense. Um, but, when someone's actually evaluating your application, they're gonna read the whole thing. Um, email email without a letter. Uh, I think you're asking, should an email include a letterhead? I don't know how an email include you mean like an embedded image? No. I mean, so I'm not totally sure what you mean, but I'm pretty sure my answer is no. I mean, maybe have an email signature, but even then, I don't think that's necessary. Um, how do I understand which universities are a good fit for you? Could you enhance your chances of being recruited? Again, back to the sort of caveat of different fields, this working slightly differently. So, like, if you're in a humanities discipline, then I would look maybe towards like the specialization of the program and whether that fits the kind of thing that you want to do. Like, do they have coursework in that topic? Are there faculty who, I mean, usually for most PhD programs, the answer to this question is, are there faculty who do the kind of work that you want to do? Um, but that becomes even more important if it's a field where you are like admitted to work with a particular advisor, in which case advisor fit becomes very important. So the answer to which program is a good one for you is probably where there would be a good advisor, with the caveat that in more humanities disciplines where that advisor fit like is not quite as critical a thing. It might be more sort of broad than like thinking about individual people. Um, someone professors reply to emails asking for you to self-fund. And you get so are you applying to master's programs? Um, so I'm not sure. I'm not sure what your question is. This one about self-funding. I think maybe you're asking. Yeah. Okay. There's not actually a question there, but I will just say that it is unusual for master students to be guaranteed funding. I have a meeting with a professor where you've applied. Wish me luck. Any advice on what questions I should ask in the first meeting? I have a couple of videos about this. One's about PhD interviews, and one's about what to look for in a potential advisor. That said, I think the first one is probably more relevant here. Like, I think until you're admitted, you're not really like interviewing the advisor yet. I mean, if I think good questions for where you're being interviewed um, are like, what research are you particularly excited about right now? Um, you know, um, what kinds of work are people, are students in the department doing? um like probably more researchy type stuff. Now at the point when you're admitted into a program and you're trying to decide where to go, there's a lot more pointed kinds of questions you might ask, things about advising style and that. I mean, you can ask those kinds of questions, just be a little bit careful that it doesn't start to feel like you're interviewing them, you know what I mean? um and then also, are there things that you actually want to know, I think would be a question. um in a field where the profs are mainly from top schools, so I don't really know how you can how I can better form a school list. Um, trying to include safe schools, but you can't really find profs there. Really? You can't find profs like at the. I mean, so there's one thing where like, um, huh. Yeah, that seems strange to me because obviously, so like let's say, a lot of the faculty, in your field are like at Stanford and MIT and Yale. Um Obviously not all of the students who graduate out of their programs are going to go to Stanford, MIT and Yale. So like they've got to be somewhere. Um so I mean, if this is really the case, and I think I don't really know how to help you. But it seems unlikely to me that this is actually the case. So maybe look at where the students who have graduated from these programs have gone, because I guarantee you some of them are professors somewhere. Um, what makes a competitive PhD applicant? I um that's way too broad. of a question. There's all kinds of things that can make a PhD applicant good. Um, yeah, I have lots of videos on this kind of stuff. If you haven't, the video that I have on why applicants are rejected is maybe more helpful here. Like there are all kinds of things that can make someone competitive. Maybe they're like an amazing fit for like a particular professor's research. Maybe they have done an absolutely amazing research project that like could have been a dissertation, but they did it as a master's student. Maybe they came out of a like top program at an amazing university and did awesome, and their letters of recommendation are all the most glowing things that you've ever heard in your life. There's all kinds of things. Applications are considered very holistically, and so strengths can always make up for weaknesses. What's my opinion on Duolingo? I have no opinion on that. I don't really pay attention to English language scores as long as they hit whatever our like university required minimum is. Oh, we're at the last question. If you have any last ones, get them in very quickly. Otherwise, I will make this the last one. I stopped myself from applying to Ivy Leagues because the feeling you'll not be selected. How do you get over the fear of rejection? You don't. I mean, you're not going to get. I mean, you should have a fear of rejection for everywhere you apply because there's a chance that you get rejected from everywhere, right? Like one of the things about PhD admissions is that sometimes it actually has absolutely nothing to do with how good you are, and it's just an issue of luck and timing, right? So like you might get into Harvard and you don't get into University of Flyover State. So yeah, I mean, you should always have a fear of rejection. I would say reach to the extent that you can afford to, right? Like I completely understand how people want to limit the number of places they apply because it costs money to apply. Um, but to the extent that you can apply to places and you think you might be a fit for that program, you should try. And it's hard, it's stressful. Fear of rejection is the case everywhere. I've been querying literary agents since August, and I have no bites, and it's extremely depressing. Uh, this kind of stuff. It's just hard. It's always hard. Try to get a good support system. Make sure someone in your life knows what you're going through, and you can rant to them about it. How are letters of recommendation evaluated? So the purpose of a letter of recommendation is for them to be able to speak to your potential as a graduate student. Um, so that's like what do they say about you to that extent? So better, and again, I have a whole video on letters of recommendation that might be helpful for you. Um, it it's more important that that they know you well enough to say like useful things about you than that they're, a big name or something like that. Um, so, a letter from like luminary in the field that says nothing but this person took my class, they got an A in my class, like that's not useful. If that's the only kind of letter you can get, then it's better than nothing. But people who know you well enough to speak to your potential as a graduate student is what looks good. Um, Will US universities provide expenses for your spouse? No. Uh, if you are in a funded PhD program, then you receive a stipend. I do have a video about funding for PhD programs that you might find useful, but it's not going to. But there's no reason why having a spouse would make any difference to like how much the university is paying you. What matters more, letters of recommendation or experience? They both matter and in slightly different ways, and different people will probably think that one is more important than the other. Um, are you saying that like you think that of these internships you're applying to, one is going to give you a better letter of recommendation than the other? Um, Probably not. I mean, I would go with whatever internship you think is going to result in you doing the best, most related work that's going to make you happy. And then, whatever work you do, you'll be able to get a letter of recommendation probably from whoever supervises you. Do publications help in getting selected for a PhD? Yes, to the extent that research experience can help you get selected for a PhD. Some people do put a lot of stock in publications. I do not. I mean, okay, I don't, to the extent, to very briefly repeat my rant from earlier. I think that you can have just as good research experience without having a publication yet. Um, so like I would consider those two things equally. Like if you've done the same kind of research, but one, started 6 months earlier, so you have a publication and the other person doesn't, I would consider those two things equally. That said, it certainly is a nice little gold star, and a lot of people care a lot. um, Also, I realize I'm just like skipping the comments where people say thank you. And so blanket, you're welcome. I'm glad this is helpful for people. um, it's November. Should you reach out to professors for the deadline from December 1st? So I typically recommend reaching out to prospective advisors if you're going to do that no sooner than 3 months before the deadline and no later than like 2 weeks before the deadline. So if you haven't reached out now is a good time. How is GPA typically assessed? I mean, it varies, and it's just one part of an application. Some people put more stock in it than others. Uh, and it's one of those things where like if it's particularly low, other things can make up for it. If it's particularly high, maybe it can help make up for other things. There's a lot of weird context around GPA too that you never really know what's going on. I don't think it tends to be a like auto reject ever because of those kinds of issues. And it's also one of those things that like you can't change at this point. So like, it'll probably be fine. Are travel and lodging for PhD interviews typically covered by the school? Um, typically, yes. If they do in person interview slash open house. Like sometimes it's after admission. Like sometimes they basically do open houses where it's for you to decide where to go, and they do admission before that based on like Zoom interviews. But if they have you come to the university, typically yes, lodging and stuff is covered. Is it admission committee interview for PhD and CS like a job interview? Should we be prepared for live code? Ooh, God, I hope not. Okay, I don't know the answer to this, but I I would be shocked if it was a coding interview. But I'm not gonna say no because it's not like I've ever, I'll have to remember to ask my friends in CS, but I think the answer here is probably no. And then the other thing I would say is that I have a video on PhD interviews that might be helpful. Um Does a person with a PhD have to read as many books as I have in my background? No. This is also an extremely small percentage of the number of books that are in my house. I also haven't read all of them. I'm also old. Remember, I've had many, many years to read lots of books. um, do professors Google the students from when they receive emails? If yes, did you have a portfolio website? I don't do this, and I mean, I'm not going to say I've never done this. There's probably something in an email before that would have like inspired me to Google them, but probably not because like that's just more time, right? Like if and also like there's a difference between like if you just get an email from someone, like they haven't even applied yet, like you're not going to sink a bunch of time into that, and that's just more time. That said, I'm not going to say never. Um, it's not a bad idea to to have an online presence when you're applying to PhD programs, even if it's a LinkedIn, in case someone, you know, Googles you when they're actually evaluating your application, because I'm sure that happens sometimes. Um, yeah, but I wouldn't I wouldn't stress too much about this. Can a co-author on a research paper write a letter of recommendation? Yes, sure. Probably a good one. Can someone who's your lecturer and has a master's degree provide a recommendation? Yep, both of those are totally fine. Again, it should be people who can speak to your potential as a PhD student, and an instructor in a class where like you did very well, you did sort of grad student level work. They can speak to how awesome you are and how you're going to thrive in a PhD program. Perfectly acceptable. And someone who's a co-author on a paper is probably also someone who knows about your work and the kind of work that you would do in a PhD program. So that would be great. Um, um, all right. I think we hit the end of all the questions. Excellent. Well, if people happen to see this live stream later, which often happens, please feel free to leave questions in the comments. Um, I probably will. I probably will not do another one of these until we get to until the spring, when people are starting to make decisions and do interviews and that kind of thing, since we're getting so close to admission season. So if you have questions about applications, please feel free to leave them in the comments and I will answer them. Blanket reminder to everyone, however, if you email me and ask me if I will look at your application materials, my answer will be no. Partly because I would spend all of my time doing that if I was doing that, and partly because it's better to get advice from someone in your field. And I will reiterate a piece of advice that I've given before, which is that use your letter writers to look over your materials for you, because you're going to want to send them to them anyway. And so you can say, hey, could you please write me a letter of recommendation? I'm attaching a copy of my statement of purpose so that what I want to do and what I'm focusing on for my PhD applications. If you have any feedback for me on this, I would also really appreciate it. So that is a big piece of my advice as you finish up your applications. And good luck to everyone. Yeah, good luck. That is my final thing that I will end on. And bye.